Hello again, everyone tuning in. It's that time, it's that place in the universe for another episode of Iris of Our Eye, episode 25. I'm sitting down with Stephen Roach today. Met him on Threads. There was this lady who was asking for help for her podcast, I think, starting a podcast or something, and he commented like, "Oh yeah, I can help you," and I did too, but she never. I even DM'd her, but I don't think she ever hit me back up for her help. So I'll never know now, dude. That's just the weird part of people not ever communicating or responding back. You never really know. You're just like total mystery in life. But we're here to talk about Steven's art, and I was doing the at least a modicum of amount of background research on this gentleman, this beautiful soul, and to my knowledge, he's a poet. Uh, I don't know if all of those books that were listed in that description were all children's books, but there's at least one children's book, and then maybe a couple other ones. And then he's also a podcaster with the Makers and Mystics podcast, which hopefully somewhere on the screen appeared his logo and all that good stuff when I was saying it. And then also a multi-instrumentalist and has a band, which I don't actually remember what the band's name is called. Water, I think it was water
Songs of
related.
Water.
Songs of Water, there you go. Which I was at an ayahuasca ceremony maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago now, and there was someone who I don't know if you know the song, but it's just a song that's like "Water is our life," and it kind of just like repeats it a bunch of times,
Mm.
and it seems extremely related to songs of water. And then I think the only other line that was in the song was like "You flow in circles," and it just kind of like loops back on those two lines a couple times. Beautiful song, beautiful interview, hopefully. But Steven, is there anything else that you want to say for your introduction?
I think it was a beautiful introduction. Well done.
Thank you. Good.
And the social etiquette of threads and all social media for that case, kind of challenges our humanity sometimes, right? But we made our way here. And so I think we should have a beautiful conversation in front of us.
I do believe. I pray. I pray. It's all we can ask for is see what unfolds. So we'll just go right into the deep end.
Let's do it.
What is art to you, sir?
Oh, man. You're just going to dive right in, huh? I think that's the question that poets and philosophers and artists themselves have been trying to answer for centuries at this point. What is art? And I'm not going to be so presumptuous to think that I have the answer to that question. I think many of us, like myself, spend our lifetime trying to answer that question, but I know what art is when I feel it, and I know what art is when I encounter it. And in fact, I'd go so far as to say that I think that everything is art when we view it as art. And
Hmm.
so there's a relationship between the subject and the person beholding it that creates the art between them. And, you know, one of my favorite artists is the French artist Marcel Duchamp. I don't know if you're familiar with Marcel Duchamp, but he is responsible for creating these found objects called ready-mades. He was also the father of conceptual art, but what he would do is that what he was famous for, we should start there, is he took a urinal, turned it on its side, signed a fake name to it, and then submitted it to a gallery.
Oh man.
And the entire art world was livid and just turned the world upside down on its head because they said, "This is not art. How can you say this is art? This is a manufactured item. And in fact, it's crude of you to bring such an item into our gallery and consider that this is art." But what happened is that it sparked the debate. Well, why is this not art? And so then people began to ask the same question you asked me. What is art? Does art require the craftsmanship of the artist? Does art require that we have talent or skill, or is art what we designate as art? And that was his idea, and that's why he's called the father of conceptual art, is because he said that art is not bound in the material itself, but art is the concept behind the material. So he did a whole series of things. He put a snow shovel on the wall and signed his name to it. He took a hat rack, signed his name to it. My favorite is one called Bicycle Wheel, where he took an actual bicycle wheel and he mounted it on a stool, and that was the art. And I've actually made one of my own in homage to Marcel Duchamp. I called mine Ferris wheel because I
Mm.
found an old Ferris wheel and I mounted it to a round antique piano stool. And so that was my ready made that I kind of made as an intentional imitation of his art, because that's another thought that we could get into. A lot of people say that art requires a certain measure of originality. And I think as artists, we all hate it when we're ripped off, or we all hate it when someone steals our work. We all have that desire to create something original, unique, that is our own. But yet at the same time, there's something beautiful about imitation that is also part of the creative process. And so my ready made was an intentional imitation of his ready made. And I think that if you really get into the thought behind that, it was an original work of art that I made, but my original work of art was an imitation, and that's what made it original. But anyway.
Dude, that's a trip right there. Oh my God. Like an original imitation, or it
Yeah.
reminds me of a show I tried to start with a friend, however many moons ago that was. It was The Original Plagiarists.
Yeah, there you go.
So yeah, it was a great working title. Didn't really go anywhere, but I thought
Yeah.
it's at least similar to what you were just talking about.
Well, here's a fun thought on that line too then. Let's break down the word original. All right?
Sure.
So, when you think about if somebody says, "Oh man, that's so original." What they're saying is this is novelty.
Hmm.
We've not seen anything else like this before. But yet at the same time, if we're talking about a Broadway musical or something and I said, "Yeah, he was an original member of the cast."
Hmm.
Well, in that context, it means he was one of the first ones to be in the play. So, in the same word, original, you have something that means new and never seen before. And at the same time, you have something that existed from the beginning. Same
Right.
word.
Right.
And I love it. Like when you break down the word original, you get origin.
Hmm.
And so there's something about art that takes us back to the beginning of things, and at the same time is something we've never seen before. And I think that's what makes art, is that it has this eternal quality, even a spiritual quality to it, if you will, that embodies the origin of things, and yet at the same time it's something never been seen before.
That's such an incredibly beautiful thought. I'm so glad. I've as you were beginning your description of like what you feel art to be, I could just feel like the expertise kind of just like oozing out of you, of just like, oh man, I feel like I'm the not so much the expert here anymore. I'm definitely like the beginner, and that's a good thing to be, man. I learning and educating, and
Mhm.
I definitely, as an artist myself, strive to be original, or I want that to be a thing that people like see in me. But is not originality the rehashing, or like, this is a term that I'm trying to coin or get people to use in the similar vein as rehashing, like rememing. Like remembering is like you recalling that idea, but like to rememe it is like the whole phenomena of memes on the internet is like you take a picture and put text on it and then contextualize it to wherever that meme is within the subculture of the internet. So like to re-meme something is like you're doing that in a way of like the thing that you're I guess either imitating or trying to mimic, then becoming its own separate, distinct thing. And
Yes.
is I guess that's because I've asked that to other people, like where originality originates from.
Yeah. Yeah. I love it. I think that's beautiful. There is a documentary that a guy named Kirby Ferguson made years ago called Everything is a Remix.
Mm,
And it's a beautiful documentary. I recommend anybody to check it out. But he goes through all these different pieces of art and music, and he traces their history back. And so, like for instance, you'll have like a drum beat that originated with Led Zeppelin. You know that.
mm.
Yeah, right.
Classic, classic.
It's like the classic. But then he fast forwards, and then you've got the Beastie Boys in the '90s. You know, and he just follows the whole history of this thing. And I think that you've even heard phrases, and the irony about this is that everybody from John Lennon to, I think, Cummings or several different artists have been attributed to this quote. But like, you've heard, and then Austin Kleon wrote the book called Steal Like an Artist. And so there's this phrase that circulates around that says, um you know amateur poets borrow, professional poets steal,
Mm,
something like
sure.
that. And I think the differentiation is here because, like, a couple of my influences, people that I really admire, would be Sufjan Stevens. I love the work of Sufjan Stevens. I also love Niels Fromm. If you've listened to any of he's a composer, electronic music, brilliant.
Mm,
So when I listen to them and something resonates in me, it triggers that inspiration. It triggers that it's an inciting event that triggers creativity in me. So then I want to reproduce. I want to then create my own work. I want to learn it. I want to figure it out. It's like it suddenly my curiosity is piqued. Suddenly I want to know how they did it. I want to
mm,
do what they did. Now, if I figure it out, at best, maybe I can do a cover, or people that hear it will say, "Oh yeah, he's trying to be Sufjan."
mm,
But if I'm really good, I assimilate that to the point that nobody knows that that was my influence anymore, but I've made it my own, and then I've remixed it with
mm,
all the other influences in my life, and I've come up with something that appears to be original. And I just think that that's what we have to do with imitation. I mean, even if you think about a child, they imitate their parents or their caregiver. That's
mm,
how they begin to learn to engage life. So the initial steps in the creative process require imitation. But if we want to mature as artists, we have to let go of the intention of imitating as an end goal,
mm.
and make it assimilating into our process so that what comes out is actually us.
Sure. Right. No, definitely. It's like thinking of imitation as like the highest form of flattery
There you
for
go.
people. And then I would prefer, I obviously, if anybody was inspired or felt the desire to imitate me, that they were like, yeah, this guy, to
Right.
like cite the source and not so much just be a plagiarist, would be like, oh, this is mine. I made this, like, and it's not even yours. Like, because then it's like, yeah, not giving credit where credit is due is kind of
Mhm.
underhanded tactic, if I could
Totally.
say so. And then imitation being the highest form of flattery. I guess the word I'm thinking of is like homage, of like you're just this like almost seeing something that is so resonates so deeply with you and feeling like that inspiration or the call to be like, oh, I want to make something that's on par
Yeah,
with, similar to, or
totally.
exactly the like. And I'm curious, how big was the Ferris wheel that you put
Yeah.
on the stool? Because you say
Man, I
Ferris wheel,
wish.
I'm thinking like a huge one, but it's like probably not a huge one.
No, it's actually right outside of my garage. I could go grab it. and show it to you. But I think that's a great example though, is because from the gate I said to you, "Hey, I did this piece that was intentionally imitative of Marcel Duchamp."
Mhm.
Now, if I'd have come in here and said, "Oh man, no, I've never seen a ready-made. I never saw his work. This it's just it's coincidence." You know, let's
Mhm.
just own it. Let's just own it. But I think it brings up a really interesting question for me that maybe you've encountered as well. But since we're living in the age of AI now,
Mm.
questions of ownership are a really big deal for artists right now, especially
Mhm.
for visual artists, musicians, especially. Like, you can go into Chat GPT and say, "Hey, spit me out a set of lyrics that sound like John Lennon,"
Mhm.
or spit me out whatever it is, create a song that sounds like this. I have a lot of artist friends who are really concerned about those things because there is something holy, if you will, about the creations that we come up with. They're sacred. There's something that is born out of our unique experience in life. And for someone to take that, strip the heart out of it, and give you the form, I think that that is something concerning that maybe legislation should be a part of in that regard. That might be one of the few places I ever say legislation
Oh.
could help. I don't even know if I've ever said that another time, but I do think that when it comes to the social life of our artworks, there does need to be some sort of system in place that protects the work of artists.
I could definitely see that. I think there also should always kind of have to be an asterisk of like made with AI,
Yeah.
because we're at a point still where it's in its infancy and you generally are able to tell like, oh, this is made with a computer, or computer did this based on putting in whatever code that put the things together the way that it did. But I don't know how much more time it's going to take where it's going to get to a point where it isn't indistinguishable from something a human being
Yeah.
is theoretically going to take 20, 30, 40 years to be able to put all the skills together and create something that looks incredible.
Hmm.
But man, to say that you need legislation to fucking, I get it, because it's like my thing is like you just would think people, or you prefer people to just act with that like the tact or the grace of like, yeah, I
Yeah.
made this with an AI. But there's always going to be the people that want to cut the corner and be like, ah, well, I didn't use an AI. But it's like,
Yeah.
where's your portfolio of work that's like would be the background to your
Sure.
skill progression of like, yeah, you did make use of
Yeah.
AI. We can tell.
Right. And again, my statement there is an untested thought that I'm just thinking in real time with you. I think because I'm an advocate for artists, that's what I do is I advocate for artists as well as I create my own art. I think that there's something of the humanity of the creation of art that AI can't reproduce. And I mean, we have to remember that AI is also trained because we upload our own works. We teach it,
Hmm.
and so I think that I've talked to several people who are talking about the ethics of AI, and I think that's something that it all goes back to our own humanity. We can't escape that. The computers, the robots are not going to destroy the world, but we might destroy ourselves,
Hmm.
you know, if we don't address the problems in our own hearts before we begin to. It's like we're little kids trying to drive a 747 airplane, I think.
No, I definitely I feel that extremely deeply, that there's just a bunch of like adults walking around that aren't any more mature than children, and somewhere between like second and like I don't know, eighth grade of just like
Yeah.
emotional maturity is a hard commodity to come by, I guess. And then definitely ethics or morals are not a
Right.
thing that like exist very regularly in
Yeah.
our society anymore. And it's because
Yeah.
like AI is a tool to whatever end you're aiming to use the tool is what distinguishes a knife from just a thing that you helps you cook to injuring another human being to the point of
Totally.
the police needing to be involved. So it's that ethic part of the AI is like just, and also sort of to the thing of like great artists steal, or good artists steal, great artists don't get caught, which is what the quote, way I was familiar with that quote. So it's like
Yes.
give credit where credit's due. Like if you're gonna train your AI on these images, you should probably be paying that artist, especially if they're trying to sell that piece of art. Like don't just be like stealing it and be
Yeah.
like, all right, this is mine now
Right.
because I put it into my fed it into my AI and now I don't ever have to
Yeah.
pay you. Like that's kind of
Yeah.
fucked up.
Right. Right. It's interesting because we demand excellence from the artists, but we're also willing to let them starve to give it to us.
Oh, of course.
You know,
Yeah.
and that's a whole different thing. Matter of fact, I stole that quote from an art scholar named Hans Ruckmacher, who wrote a small book called "Art Needs No Justification." It's a foundational book in my life, but
Mm.
um, it's an interesting thing where we demand excellence, but yet we're not always willing to pay for that excellence. You know.
No, definitely. Based on the conversations that I've had so far in this podcast, it seems to be a fairly Western predicament to be in, of just like
Mhm.
there's this like commercialization slash the artist wants it to be something with which they can like make their living on life and like grow and expand in an infinite economic way, the way that everybody's, or people that are obsessed with business want there to be a bottom line that always is bigger, versus the like the Eastern, specifically Balinese, with I want to say, is it 11, 8 or 11? No, it was 11 with Mike Parisi. He was telling me that like in Bali, it's just like a thing that people do within their culture to support and just make art, and no one's like really doing it to make a living.
Yeah, yeah. I've heard that at one point, you know, art, there was no word for art because it was just everything was art.
Mm,
Everything, it was just a part of the way you made your meal, the way that you loved your family, the way that you engaged your friendships, the way that you did your business. Everything was art. But then when we commodified art, that's when we had the separation between everything being art and then no, this is art as a product, you know?
mm,
And I don't have a problem with art as a product per se, but I do think that art functions on a different economy than selling kitchen gadgets or whatever it is. I think art functions on a much different value system, and again, that's why I find such parallels between art and then spirituality is
mm.
because art functions much on a similar vibe as the spirit, because it's just a different economy, if that makes sense, you know.
Oh yeah, it's like it's what's good for your soul
Yes.
is good for the art, and I guess vice versa. That like what's good for
Yeah,
the bottom line isn't so good for the
I would
earth.
think so. I would
If
think so.
there's some parallel there,
Yeah,
definitely feels like it. Oh man, there was something I wanted to say, but I just keep conversations happen so fast that it's like
that's good.
I,
Well, I'll throw a quote out then. If you're familiar with John Muir, he was the environmentalist. He was kind of a mystic and kind of a mountain guy, a writer. But John Muir, he said we need places to play in and places to pray in.
mm,
And I've kind of taken that and I've said, you know, beauty is to the soul what food is to the body. And there have even been studies that people have done, like in orphanages and places where conditions are very harsh, or even in war torn societies. When you introduce or reintroduce beauty into that environment, it changes the healing process and the growth and the morale of the people there. And there
mm,
was this one cellist years ago when Iraq was just, decimated due to the war. And he would go out in the middle of these smoldering buildings and set his cello up in the middle of it and just begin playing these concertos, and different stories I've heard. Dorothy Day was a Catholic worker that she worked with orphans a lot, and in the orphanages she would put up beautiful works of art and imagery and color and all these things that you could look at it from the outside and say, well, those things were not necessary, right? Those things were not pragmatic. Why do that? Why play the cello in the middle of a bombed out structure? Why, you know, and I think that it's because our own mental health, our own emotional health, we need beauty like we need bread, you know?
No, yeah, I definitely think it's because I've heard it sort of described in this way that if you removed all the warring people from a battlefield, peace immediately floods the space.
Mm,
And like that inner peace, the natural beauty of the resonance of silence, or whatever that wavelength is, it's just like is healing to the human psyche. And the modern indoor cat person staring at their phone 24/7 is just like flooding their brain and their psyche with whatever they're scrolling past and unconsciously taking it in. It's like junk food for the soul.
yeah.
Uh, you need the balance of like getting to a point where thoughts that because thoughts are happening to us in
Mm,
my opinion on the deepest subconscious level. They bubble up out of us and or are passed through us. Thinking can be a conscious act, but a lot of our own thoughts we think are thinking are just happening to us. And that channel of divinity, if you could get to a point where you're comfortable enough in your own silence, you can realize that it's just like you're watching clouds go by, and the harder you try to grasp that cloud and stick it into your identity is like when things get weird and messy, I think.
mhm. Yeah. Well, I think that it kind of lends itself even to the crisis of meaning that we have right now.
Mm.
I'm especially, earlier you made mention of ethics and morality and a lot of these structures that seem to have been deconstructed in our society, and a lot of them have given way. In some ways we know what we've let go of. Well, we think we know what we've let go of, but it's the whole baby in the bathwater thing. You get rid of
Mm.
some things that maybe needed to die, but there are some things that were good that maybe we've let go as well. And so in my experience, we're kind of in a wild west right now where we've left something but we haven't arrived somewhere else, and so we're having a real crisis of meaning.
Mhm.
And I think that that's actually where the artist plays a significant role in society right now, because the artist invites us to take a second look at something, or sometimes the artist invites us to look at something that maybe we haven't seen before,
Mhm.
and in that way it can help us get through the nebulous of lack of meaning and arrive at some new understandings of things. I don't know if that makes sense to you or what you think about that.
No, that's definitely a way that I see it. That the thing about an artist is the ability to rememe information essentially that
Mm,
you can project your own meaning onto it, but then also like try to decode the meaning of the image that you're
yeah.
seeing and allow for a reanalyzation or a new digestion and creation of what the idea you think is put in front of you. Like I'll I hope this isn't too controversial for anyone, and maybe I'll have to edit it out. I don't know,
Let's
but
go.
it's just like when the lockdowns were going starting and I was very very much on the line of like my freedoms, please stop taking them away. But I got to the point where like culturally I literally couldn't buy gas because I didn't have a piece of cloth covering my face. And I just like the entire time was very much just like this is a big scheme for profit of the um, pharmaceutical companies. And it's like no matter how much that's what I thought and saw and felt, it's like other people's their ability to just like, oh, this is what the TV's saying, this is what we're
Yeah.
doing. I'm like, I can't, for as much as I
Yes.
want to be the artist of like, hey, like pay attention, this is what's really going on. if people don't have that ability to see because they're not artists, it's like the meaning is totally lost on them.
Yes, no, that's really good. And I think that we've kind of progressed far enough away from the pandemic now that a lot of people are starting to consider the perspective of what you just now said. Before it was tied up into politics, so nobody wanted to question certain things without feeling like they were going to fall on the wrong side of the fence or something like that. Now
Mm-hmm.
it seems like people are willing to take more of an objective look at it, because it's not just this one group saying things like that, but we're all saying like, wait a minute, what happened? But but that did play a huge part in this crisis of meaning that I mentioned. And I was thinking about your word rememe, and I love that because the word meme, it comes from mimesis or
Mm-hmm.
from mimetic, which again is imitation. And I've got a friend of mine who wrote a book called Wanting, and it's all about the power of mimetic desire.
Ooh.
And it's a brilliant book. Luke Burgess is his name,
Mm-hmm.
and he talks about how our desires are modeled to us by society.
Mm-hmm.
And we often think that our desires are those things that we just either have or don't have. I either desire this or I don't have this. And there are some desires that I think, genuinely well up, like you were talking about, like our thoughts well up from our unconscious. But I think even our unconscious is a conglomerate of intake. And I mean, the mind is such a mystery. I mean, that'll get into dreams and
Yeah, yeah, I agree.
what's taking place when we're unconscious, but for this conversation, I think that looking at mimetic desire as something that is modeled to us from society, that's where things can get a little bit dicey. When we see something modeled, when we see something put forth as truth, when we see something that is told to us by such a mass number of people, to think differently than that, some people are uncomfortable with that. Now, I think what's interesting is that artists have been the ones that have done that from the dawn of time. Is it the nonconformity is kind of baked into it?
Mm-hmm.
But I think that what's concerning to me, again, thinking about the artist in our modern society, is that I'm seeing way too many artists pander to popularity. And I'm seeing way too many artists go after propaganda
Mm-hmm.
and virtue signaling in their work, because if I take this stance, it's going to plug that hole of validation that I have in my own heart. If I go against the grain, or if I see things differently, I'll be rejected. I might get canceled.
Mm-hmm.
To me, the artist has always been the nonconformist. The artist has always been the one that has kind of fought back against, you know, the predominant narrative of society. But I think what's interesting is because the time that we live in now, some of the dominant narratives, whether it's religion, in here in the West specifically, in America specifically, a
Mm-hmm.
lot of the dominant narratives that built Western society have been deconstructed largely by numbers of people. And so in place of that, a lot of the renegades seem to have taken taken the place of that narrative. And so what happens? Here's the question. What happens when the outcast becomes the norm? What happens
Right.
when the fringe becomes the center? What are the artists saying then? Like, it's almost like what used to be at the center of a nuclear culture has now
Mm-hmm.
become the counterculture. I don't know. It's
No, it's something I've noticed from just the experience of growing up as a child in the swinging Overton window, to use the political term, or the pendulum through the Overton window, as it has shifted over and over and over and farther to whichever direction we are now. That it's, I mean, technically, I guess you'd say it has the blue shift, the liberal, all those like words that kind of are supposed to mean something that like don't exactly mean what you think that they mean, because it's
Yeah.
the meaning is lost. But
Yeah.
it's my generation, since I'm like the oldest Gen Z, and the people who are growing up who are younger than me are kind of going back. The counterculture is somehow now becoming what it was, that was the mainstream culture in like the 40s and 50s, of like traditionalism. Like, we just
Totally.
want men to be strong and to like function and do well, and the women to be soft and like lovable, and like not rabid crazy people that are like telling us that all men are bad. Or the whole meme of like the women who are like, oh, I'd rather pick a bear in the woods over a man. And then I just saw the one of the headlines of like, woman dies to bear attack for the first time in California in like however long. Like, this is what happens when you pick the bear, ladies. Like, we're the the brainwashing or the cultural conditioning of just like this
Yeah.
thing of like the artists that are putting on the golden handcuffs because they think that like monetary success is the only thing that to value. And that it's like, it's fast food for the soul. That like, yeah, you're gonna make all this money doing OnlyFans, or make all this money selling out and like doing what the big corporations want you to do, or the government tells you is the right thing to do. But then it destroys your integrity because you're not being genuinely authentic to what is true and real in the world. And that disconnect is just where we're at. And the
Yeah.
only other thing that I want to say, based on what you had said earlier about like the psyche and dreams and all of that, and because the fundamental ideas, as far as I can tell, I don't think I would really consider myself an idealist in like the Greek philosophical school of thought. But it's like the word that I came up with to describe archetypal, like where archetypal ideas originate from, is the preciminal. I just the best I can do to
Yeah.
create something that helps us describe what's actually going on is the Plato's cave effect of like the preciminal, or these like incredibly powerful ideas that are like pushing and then translate however they hit through light into archetypal ideas that are unconscious, is trying to like work out. And the desire of to reproduce is just something that's like deep welled within me. Like, I know I'm going to be a father at some point in the future, and it's just these things that are like beyond our control, and we have to surrender to because they're just the natural flow of life.
Yeah. No, it's beautiful. That's beautiful. And I think that's why for me, I even have a podcast called Makers and Mystics. And that's because I think that there's a relationship between the maker and the mystic. And I think that now more than ever, the mystic really is an important part of this cultural moment. The
Mhm.
mystic meaning one that wants to go beyond rational argument to the very essence of being, one
Mhm.
that wants to actually have, in the mystic language, union with God, or to have that encounter that goes beyond the realm of the politic or the realm of the argument, and then drills down to the essence, and then you can build back out from there. And I think that
Mhm.
that's, in my language, that's the way I interpret some of what you're saying. Is it's almost like we came so far away from things, but now there's almost a shift where we're re-exploring some of the things, not in the same way. I'm not saying we're going back to the 1950s. I definitely don't mean that.
Yeah,
But
right.
I do mean what I said earlier, where the whole baby and bathwater thing is that there are certain structures of meaning, and there are certain frameworks of meaning that are built into our design as human beings. And
Mhm.
when we can at least start at that very fundamental place, that very foundational place of being, and then begin to build out, maybe we get something more beautiful than anything we've seen before. But I think, again, destruction sometimes precedes new creation. And I think, yeah, um, but it's the intent is really what makes the difference. Like, if I just we talked about war, if I just go in and bomb a place, destruction is my end game. Well, that's not very creative. But let's say that I want to build a new room on my house. I'm going to go in and blow up the wall, tear down the wall. It
Hmm.
looks much the same way, but the end goal is very different. Is that, and so I
Yeah.
think that's where the artist can really engage in the crisis of meaning and dismantle some things. But then also, I think as artists, we have a responsibility to provide a vision of hope,
Yeah.
or to look beyond the present moment. And that's not to say everything has to be happy. That just means that the mystic and the artist can see beyond the moment and kind of call that future moment into the present, if that makes sense.
No, definitely. The quote that I love, or it's a lyric from the Red Hot Chili Peppers, "Destruction breeds creation." Just
Mm,
to get it
yeah,
to
yeah,
an essential phrase of
totally.
what you're describing. And then oh man, the for some reason the Nietzsche quote, like God is dead, but
Hmm.
then something about like because this is from like the first interview that I did for this podcast with my mentor who's helping me write my book, that it's it's like you stared into the void stares back, or that like you became like this slayer of leviathans. It's this new terrifying, like after all the dragons are dead and God has ceased to be
Yeah,
the thing that holds society together, and we all want to worship the next thing. Is like people worship science and
yeah,
this obsession with the intellect as if it's going to reveal all of the mysteries, when all of the highest levels of science now, the quantum, are just going back to what the mystics were saying thousands of years ago. Like
so
you're
true.
you're just putting the meaning into it, and like you're the thing that's causing the wave function to collapse into particles. Like
Yeah, it's really funny how sometimes it seems that in a quasi scientific, or maybe even a real scientific effort to dismantle some of the religious impulse, I've seen it actually confirm the religious impulse, and maybe it just puts different language on it. I don't see a conflict between science and religion. I just think they're answering two different questions. For me, I think religion is answering the question why, and science is answering the question how. And that might be an oversimplification. I totally get that, but I think that there's beauty in both of those perceptions. And but what's fascinating to me about Nietzsche? I love Nietzsche, but he was a pastor's son.
Mhm.
And not only that, he of course was the most uh vehemently anti-Christian philosopher, I think, maybe of anyone.
Mhm.
But his and this could be argued, but in my study of Nietzsche, his primary critique against the church, or against Christianity rather, his primary critique was the lack of creativity, was the fact that this dogma stifled the creative spirit in humanity.
Mhm.
And when you read a lot of his writings, that seems to be at the heart of his argument against all of it. And I totally agree with him in that. But I think that if you can dissect some of the religious dogma that grows up around the original germ of I think what Jesus and the faith was intending from the beginning,
Mhm.
if you come to it with that mystic lens in a sense, then you begin to see that creativity is meant to flourish in that space. And so I think that what a lot of people, even in the deconstructionist movement, and people that are anti-religious in that sense, and I know I'm opening up a huge can of worms, by the way,
Mhm.
but I know that a lot of people that are anti-religious in that sense, they're really fighting against the religious spirit more so than the heart of what the original intent was, if you can make that distinction. And I think that's what Nietzsche was recognizing, is that creativity is a part of what it means to be human.
Mhm.
And you're claiming ultimate truth, but yet you're stifling the very thing that makes us what we are. And I think that's, when he says God is dead, I think in many ways he's talking about religion.
Yeah.
Religion is dead, and this system that has grown up around God is dead. But again, I think that's why the marriage of the maker and the marriage of the mystic can create something new and beautiful that maybe we haven't seen before. But anyway, sorry, dude, I got way off in the woods with that one.
No, dude, you're good. You're right where you need to be, man. I think that the structure of religion, because this was a thing. I don't even know how many years ago now, but it was like when I heard about like the Jeffersonian Bible versus like the King James version, or whatever sect of Christianity is doing whatever with whatever version of the Bible. Like Thomas Jefferson like broke it down where he was like, this is what Jesus actually like said, guys. Like I know like we're doing what all these other people said, all this other shit over all of the generations and times that people like, but this was what the guy like was really about. And like, isn't this the dude who's like what we're supposed to be? And like that guy was a fucking rebel all the time, his time, bro. He was a Jew that was like you don't even have to do it the way that these guys are doing it. Like it could just be easier. Dunk yourself in the water, like be blessed. Like I guess I'm the son of God, but like that remains. That's like that might be. I don't know, dude. It's that like I had this saying now because it's like as much as I would love to be able to just go back to my like it's the one where you like kind of think there's a God. It's not. Atheist is like there isn't a God. Agnostic, my agnostic Christian upbringing as a child, where I learned more from VeggieTales than I ever did going to church. So going to church that much.
Yes.
Like, yeah. Shout out VeggieTales. Shout out VeggieTales.
Represent.
Yeah, dude. What was I saying? VeggieTales, Jesus.
Nietzsche, VeggieTales. This is becoming quite the surrealist moment,
This is the American culture of the 21st century. Is Jesus and VeggieTales and Nietzsche. VeggieTales, Jesus and Nietzsche. What the fuck?
This starting to sound kind of like one of the dreams we were talking about earlier, right?
Life's a trip, man. I've just done too many psychedelics to be able to be a normal person anymore.
Yes.
Just to throw that out there as my thing, my path that I'm walking as a person.
Yeah. Well, tell me about that. What draws you to that path?
Plant medicine for me. Now that I've totally lost the thread I was trying to go on. No, you're good, man. It's just like I'm gonna look back at it and be like, no, that's what I wanted to say.
VeggieTales, plant medicine, perfect bridge.
Perfect bridge. Like, goddamn, bro. I wish who I was as a kid could see this moment and be like, what the fuck is this weirdo on about, man? But plant medicine for me, like when I started, it was like this big adventure of like, especially because like I don't know, I'm gonna dial it back from like going deep into all the way to like ayahuasca because that's like the top tier like master plant was that like ayahuasca San Pedro. But I started with smoking weed. It was very much like a band-aid to not pay attention to or feel the crushing identity like loss of like being this oldest child of my parents because they were getting divorced, and I just like started smoking weed. And I was like, oh, I don't have to. I just unconsciously probably not. This is all like in retrospect, like, oh, I don't have to feel or think about it now. I just can smoke weed and feel good. And it turned into like a decade-long thing, and I'm going this whole year not smoking any weed, seeing how far I can go in my life. And then did mushrooms as like a recreational thing, and that was like the first actual like stronger, more potent psychedelic that was on my path of healing. And eventually, because I had done breathwork training, because breathwork is like not so much like the chemical you eat it psychedelic, but an altering state of consciousness through just breathing very deeply without pausing. It's an important distinction because a lot of like talking and normal breath is just like unconscious. You're not thinking about it. But in the training, met some beautiful Jews that told me like, hey, this is this thing, but like you're too much of an alien. You wouldn't like it. Don't do it. Met these other people who did do ayahuasca ceremonies, but I didn't know that at the time, or maybe they said it just went in when you're out the other. Went to Costa Rica eventually after I made a friend who told me to go to this place, and he didn't have a passport. The kerfuffle happened because this was during COVID, and I was checking my email because I was gonna go to the place but couldn't because I got the test too early, and they were like, "You can't come, get another test." Check my email. Those people from the breathwork training were having a ceremony in California, So I was like, hey, bro, like, come to California with me instead. And then he didn't because it just like wasn't meant to be for him for whatever reason. He just kind of flaked on me, and I went with my cousin, and they were doing a training, and now I'm a ayahuasca facilitator living in California. And eventually, at some point, I want to make my way all the way to the Amazon and become an actual like shaman. And I'm going to Mexico in a little bit to like hopefully find some shamans who do like mushroom ceremonies in Oaxaca.
Mm.
So it's all just like for my own personal healing. And in that first ceremony, it like broke it down of like, hey, like you're going on this grand adventure, like all of those fucking Pokemon video games you ever played, and your dad is like this fucking monster from fucking Dungeons and Dragons that like is super selfish but like really fucking powerful, but like the only thing that can defeat it is itself, and you're basically the little baby version of him that he's like, oh shit, this kid's gonna fucking take over and I'm dying, and now my dad has passed away. It's been a year, and all of these like things of the biggest to end my rant here is like the biggest thing that I've gained from starting this whole process has been the freedom of being able to put down all of the stories and limiting beliefs that were programmed into me from my childhood of like not enough, too short, not scaled, and just allowing myself the freedom to like fucking full send on it and do it.
Mm. Mm. So would you say that this process has brought healing? Like, it sounds like there's a certain measure of self-awareness that's definitely come with it. How do you feel now as opposed to when you first set out on this journey? Like, do you feel like that healing has come, or have the questions gotten deeper? Where are you in that process?
It's yeah, it's been a huge, enormous adventure. I went through a couple times where I was like the brokest in my life I've ever been, and like making it through that and seeing that I'm capable of like being homeless for 6 weeks or fucking bouncing around and not really having any certainty in my life other than just like I'm gonna wake up tomorrow and keep doing it and keep eating and surviving. It gave me a huge amount of mental and emotional resilience of like I can do this and it's not gonna be easy, but I can do it. And then the movement has kind of shifted because a lot of it's been like setting goals, and like this has been a thread in my life where I do the thing for however long it takes to accomplish the goal, and then I'm like I did it, and I'm like, oh, now I gotta like try to figure out something else to start aiming for on the horizon. So it's like slightly disenchanted, but more of like, oh, I'm like really like this is my life and I'm living it to the best of my ability, and I want to be grateful for the fact that I like did it. And there's something else of
Yeah, yeah, totally. Cool, man. Thanks for sharing all that.
thanks for asking. I don't know if we're on my podcast or your podcast anymore, but
Well, you have another podcast host, so I couldn't not ask questions, right?
dude, yeah, it's a lot easier when the other person's like at least semi interested because I do like for me, I'm just extremely curious like how you came to this point in your life of like your artistry and like I don't know. I take it back to like the hero's journey of like the or like there's a word that Jordan Peterson said that's like describes the story arc of a thing, but I can't remember it. I'd have to like go back into it. But like the inciting incident or the inciting force of like how you because I don't know how much cultural suppression of like sort of like what Nietzsche was probably complaining about with Christianity of this like dogmatic like people gotta sit down and like shut up and do what the church tells them to do versus
Yeah,
like your life of like I don't want to do that and I want to go against the
yeah,
grain and like find myself.
yeah, yeah. Well, no, I mean, my life, dude, and I mean, I'm 48, and so I've lived a lot of life, but from my earliest years, there has always been this creative aspect and this spiritual aspect that have always been kind of weaving in and out of one another in various ways. I first started playing percussion when I was like 5 years old. I asked for my first drum set. By 10 years old, I was already studying music. By 13, I was already playing in bands, in death metal bands.
Nice.
My whole family are bluegrass musicians down here in the South in North Carolina. Um, I didn't grow up in a religious context, but I did have some pretty intense guess you'd call them charismatic experiences when I was probably 10 years old. I mean, speaking in tongues, the whole bit,
Mm-hmm.
felt like fire consuming my body. It was a real encounter
Mm-hmm.
that did take place in a church setting, but I didn't follow that. Like, by the time I was 12 or 13, I had kind of gone totally the different way, and got into studying magic and occultism and different things like that. By the time I was 15, I was super into Native American teachings, as well as I did a lot of study in shamanism and the relationship between that and drumming, and the role of drumming in shamanism, which a lot of that you're probably familiar with. A lot of psychedelics at that point in my journey, and it was always tied into a spiritual quest for me. It wasn't just a party thing. It always
Mm-hmm.
had a deeper intent with me. I mean, we had those moments too, but you know what I'm saying.
Right, of course.
Um, but what's interesting for me, and I'm actually writing several memoirs about all this, so I won't be able to unpack the way the whole thing unfolded in my life. Um, but strangely enough, as I grew up, Native American spirituality ended up leading me back to the person of Jesus in a very strange way.
Mm-hmm.
And so, that's where my faith tradition rests now, is in that, is I am a follower of Jesus, but probably not in a very traditional sense, of what connotations might follow with that. um I find a lot of beauty in, like, the writings of Rumi, and in Hafiz. And I played Middle Eastern music in Sufi tea houses for a number of years, and just had studied tabla, Indian classical Indian tabla, and like I said, West African drumming, a lot of these things. So I've kind of explored. I've always been an explorer. I've always been a seeker.
Mm-hmm.
But for me, having gone through all of those things, and traveled through my own psychedelics and my own spirit quests and things like that, I did find my way back to the person of Jesus. And uh man, I don't know. I've probably been on that journey now for 26, 27 years, and the water just keeps getting deeper.
Mm-hmm.
You talked about that a lot, even in what you were saying in your own journey. And I've always found it, and I'll end with this, but I've always found it fascinating how if you go back to the Hebrew scripture, the creation narrative in Genesis, the first thing we learn about the divine being, the creator, is that God is a creative being that
Mm-hmm.
finds great pleasure in the works that God has made. And then if you look at the first interaction between the divine being and the human, that first interaction is God inviting humanity into the creative process of naming the animals. You talk about the breath work. God breathed into the human being, and then said, invited humanity into the creative process. And so for me, that's the whole of my life right now, is exploring what that divine human relationship looks like through the lens of Jesus. So that's a mouthful, dude, but hopefully you kind of get where I'm coming from. I'm a fellow artist and fellow seeker. Music and poetry tends to be my lifeblood, but then also conversations like this with fellow seekers, trying to figure out what it all means, right?
Yeah, if you can, but
Right, right.
got time for the one last final question I like to end on?
Yeah, man.
Recently heard somebody say like death is just another state of consciousness. So if you got to that state of consciousness when they hit the finish recording button and we were both to pass away on the drop of a hat, blink of an eye, what final word of wisdom would you want to if it was to be imparted unto the rest of humanity?
Yeah, for me, I would say that the most important thing would be to know that God is love, and that we are the beloved, and that at the end of our lives are the only art that we're making.
Oh, brother, oh, it's phenomenal. God gives us this life, and the way that we live our life is our gift back to God. That's
Mm,
the quote that I so
yes.
deeply feel encapsulates what you just said.
Love it. Yes.
So on that note, I'll do my uh, outro. But before that, where can the people find you?
Yeah, so you can find me on Instagram at Makers and Mystics, and that has a lot of my personal thoughts, quotes from other folks that I've had on the show, and that's where you can find me mostly is on Instagram at Makers and Mystics.
Fantastic. So everybody still paying attention. Smile more, complain less. Never, ever, ever give up until you discern this for your darndest best. Namaste. Have a great day. Slap stream if it's nighttime soon. Like, share, comment, subscribe. All the things that keep the algorithm happy and satisfied. And thank you. Appreciate you.